I'm just launching a site really this week. It's called fate.org. It's spelled P-H-A-E-T, fate. Stands for the People's Honorable Alliance for Exposing the Truth. And that's exactly what you gentlemen are doing, which is why I'm here.
All right.
Okay.
This is Géza Kistereki, Dr. Géza Kistereki. I'm the president of Silk Road Association from Central Europe, connected with China and other countries.
I'm sorry, could you speak louder? I didn't hear where you're from.
Okay, Central Europe. I live here, but originally from Central Europe, and I'm the head of a Silk Road Association, president actually. Okay? They build the Silk Road. It's a family, but it's other topic.
Okay.
And we'll have to
you have to
record, and I will have questions, and I will inform the organization, international organization.
Okay, fine.
We are working with governments actually also,
Okay.
as heroes.
Kat?
Hi, I do an online radio show every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on peoplesinternetradio.com. I've interviewed Mr. Binney and Ray for a few years now, maybe since, I don't know, 2012 or something. Yeah, I mean, we need media, we need people showing, giving these guys some voice.
Carla?
I'm Carla Steer, I'm with Global Research, and I actually only have one question for you gentlemen. I have become a total cynic. I really appreciate your making some information available to us, and I have some sense from what you're saying of the enormity of the effort to suppress what you're saying. And I shall ask the question.
Yeah. Go for it.
I recently read a book, read parts of it, Blood in the Water, about the Attica uprising and the way in which it was crushed. And I just saw the film Detroit. I don't know how many of you have seen it, but it was about the unbelievable repression, racist repression, and the power structure, which is very sophisticatedly arranged so that you've got poor white police fighting poor blacks. And the people at the top who have arranged this appear to have clean hands, and of course they monopolize the money, the power, and the voice. And I just came back recently from North Korea. I went there because I'm accredited at the United Nations, and I have sat in at Security Council meetings for several years now. Well, actually earlier when they arranged the first attack on Iraq. And I've watched the way in which the drumbeat for war is orchestrated, and I see what's going on now with North Korea. And for me, I mean, it's almost universal, the demonization of North Korea, and I don't know what we're on the verge of now, but it doesn't look good, and my hope is that the Russians will veto this ugly sanctions that the U.S. is coming up with. But my question is, the bottom line is, to put it very crudely and simply, they have the guns, they have the power, they have the weapons, and they can crush North Korea easily. That would probably end up in a world war. Somehow the Russians and Chinese would be brought in. But before it gets to that point, I have to think simplistically now. One needs to have weapons, whatever form it comes in, whether it's a very powerful voice in the media, or somebody like Émile Zola, who came out and had the courage to publish J'accuse, which turned the tide on the Dreyfus case. But we don't have enough weapons. Who was it? Napoleon said more than 1,000 bayonets. I fear one hostile printing press. I'm not sure that applies in all cases. But so you're, trying to get the facts out that the whole public's being hoodwinked, we're manipulated, we are being actually
Population control.
total, so that people vote
That's why
against,
you need information on that.
what?
That's why they're collecting all this information. That's all about population control.
Yeah, and it's terrifying, and while, you know, we demonize every other country for being a dictatorship, we've got friendly fascism here, and it won't be so friendly in a while, you know. So,
Well, occasionally, some of us have to die to keep it going, that's all.
yeah, well, a lot of us, you know,
Yeah, it depends on what you think of a number. Is it big or small?
I know, yeah. So the
The
somebody-
wrong people are dying, that's the
What?
point. The wrong people are dying, not
exactly,
the
exactly.
one starting it should die first.
Of course. I mean, it's like, yeah. I mean, why do they, well, they send the poor and the minorities to war, which is a great way to get rid of the poor and the minorities, you know. And then they come back, you know, losing arms and legs, and the care for, I'm against all these wars, but the care for the veterans who fight, you know, is horrible, you know. And my father used to say, well, if men would just refuse to fight, we couldn't have wars. But, and then I don't know, this Korean thing is really getting to me now, because on the one hand, it's fascinating that that tiny little country stands up to us and says, back off, you know, and they are acquiring what they need to survive, because that's the only thing we understand, unfortunately. If, you know, what was it, Trump said the only thing they understand? No, it's we who want the war, who are begging for war. Nikki Haley in this latest thing at the UN saying the North Koreans are begging for war. No, we are, because we love war. So how do you stop it?
How recently were you in North Korea?
May,
May.
yeah, I was very impressed with what I saw there.
How so?
Well, in spite of the sanctions, in spite of the isolation, in spite of the hostility, they have a healthcare system that is remarkable, and it's free. They had, I mean, and by this point, I worked in Chile during the Pinochet dictatorship, so it's tough to hoodwink me. I have sort of antennae for, the education system is excellent. Talk about gender equity. Women are, you know, they have women theoretical physicists there. The women walk around, they look elegant. They look much more elegant than, you know, they do here, where people are just, you know, bloated from bad food. And they're socialists. We don't like that. And it's working. So, and I don't think their leader is crazy. I don't think at all. I think he really loves his people. And the system is working, you know. The people are not terrified. You know, you can't get more blonde and blue-eyed than I am. And I would approach people in the street. I'd approach the soldiers. I say, I'm American, and I think that my country and your country should be friends. And they said, yes, we agree. And there was tremendous spontaneity, tremendous warmth. If they were afraid, they would not have associated with me, because they would have then been, you know.
Do you speak Korean?
No. I had a guide who was from the foreign ministry. I requested that, and he translated, but I knew him very well. You know, under circumstances like that, I had no defenses, because I travel alone, and I had published some articles on the sanctions, which they appreciated. So they gave me the visa, and I said, I'm traveling alone. And I prefer it that way, because then you find out what the people really are like. And they were wonderful, and my guide, that there was not a hint of him being indoctrinated or you know, any kind of the guy thinks, he analyzes. And I was just talking with somebody here about the death of the Russian ambassador, Churkin, at the United Nations, which I suspect was not a natural death.
Really?
Yeah. I'll have to meet with this guy to see well, 4 Russian ambassadors died very quickly. The ambassador to Turkey, you saw on the front page of the Times, he was shot. And I hope this is not being recorded anywhere. Really. Even in North Korea, I said, gee, I hope the CIA doesn't have this place bugged. I said it to them. I don't know, they might have. But anyway, I think that, well, my guide was actually more skeptical when I said I thought that Churkin had not died naturally. He said, well, it could have been a heart attack. I mean, he didn't introduce conspiracy. I did. And he was more, questioned it. So he did not seem to be the hard-nosed, American. They weren't demonizing us the way we demonize them.
What
So
part of the UN are you accredited to?
a press,
Press.
yeah.
Press credentials.
Yeah, I have the white P, which means I'm a resident correspondent, which means all the glossy things they give us I pile up on my desk and I have to clean it off. But it's at a point now where one more sanctions, I think the UN sanctions are doing more to inflame the North Koreans than practically anything else. And of course, they are furious about the U.S. South Korean military exercises, which are entitled decapitation of the head of, an invasion. It looks as though we're begging for war, and they want to live. They won't.
You want to ask something specific?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
Well, I'm only answering because once you get me started on North Korea and I don't stop. The point is, unfortunately, it seems as though, and this applies, I suppose, to North Korea, they have to develop the nuclear weapons because without it, we'd squash them the way we did Iraq and Libya. Now, a movement in this country that would change things so that we would not have the kind of hideous disparity that we do. I take public transportation and you see poverty. I mean, if I went around with a camera photographing the number of people sleeping in the streets, and they're, at this point it's black, white, and put that on YouTube and say, compare this to Pyongyang, we wouldn't look good. But how do you change the whole economic disparity in this country? Because I hate to use the word, it's intrinsic to capitalism, concentration of wealth and power. So how do you change it?
Just go ahead and let them respond?
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good.
Going to be that vote and that horrible resolution. And the man who was sitting next to me said, he promised me the Russians will veto it. In which case I told him I'd take him out for champagne. But if they don't, it means that we can board North Korean ships, and those three filthy words, all necessary measures, which means we can bomb the Korean ship.
And do you want to relate it to what they did with the VIPS memo? With the memo around the hacking, their work on this? So
Yeah, well,
they
do
can
you
respond?
think it's going to have any, as they say, legs in Washington?
Okay.
I'm dubious about it. I had been advocating use of the Article 5 rights of the states to hold a constitutional convention, change the Constitution as to how people go to Washington without anybody from Washington participating.
Yeah.
And so I even volunteered to write the algorithm to randomly pick from the people of the United States all those representatives going down there. So there'd be no political parties, no campaigns, no lobbying, nothing. No one would know who to lobby because you don't know who's getting the office next. It will always matter. It's all in Article 5, if you go read it, of the Constitution. States can do that.
But you need leaders, strong leaders. My feeling is to get enough people together. That's the problem with all these disparate,
Well, I think that was discussed at the meeting. I mean, there were very concrete proposals made in the VIPS memo on what the president should do, or what
Because he's not really a
suggested.
politician.
Yeah, and that
He's
he has
not.
the power to do it.
Would he be able to do anything because he
Yes.
doesn't really know what
He
he's
has the
up
authority. All he's got to do is execute it.
is use it.
Do this. You don't do it, you're fired.
But he has a lot of people around him who are not going to let him do it.
Then fire them too. If they refuse to do it, he can fire them.
Yeah.
Could you
One
get a
question that
personal
I would
meeting
like
with
to
him?
do as a follow-up.
We have paths to get to him, okay?
You what?
We have paths to get to him when we're feeding data in.
Because I would think
Fire them.
person to person, he'd listen and he'd probably get the point.
Well,
But he's
may-
up
We
against.
may try to suggest that. I don't know.
What?
Can I throw
Yeah,
something
go
in
ahead.
there? I mean, do we all really think that he's outside of the reach of the hand, of the invisible hand of the deep state? Do we really think that he is?
He is in a position to say, I don't care what you have on me, you're fired.
But would he get killed? They do
Well,
that
I
too.
mean,
Well, what I mean
That's
is,
what, that's a chance we all take to buck this whole system.
but what I'm
I mean,
trying
if
to
you don't
ask,
do it, you're never going to get there.
but do we really think that he would do that? Do we really think that he really is outside of the system? He truly is this, nothing to do with the system? I don't know if I buy that. I mean,
I know he's not totally out, but I think
Yeah.
the real threat is that they convert him to thinking their thinking is the right way to go.
Yeah,
That's the real threat.
and they
which
could.
is what they do with every president.
Yeah.
That's ever in the
Exactly.
seat.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, they're all forced to
It's all the bureaucrats that really manage stuff.
So how do you get beyond, all right, that's,
Go ahead,
how do you
Millennium
get
News.
break through that?
So, I'm from Millennium TV US, South Asian television. Is 60% ethnic, 40% English.
60%?
Ethnic. Varieties, countries, program, news, and 40% American. My question is,
You need to speak a little louder.
thank you. Why British interfere our democracy? Number one. Number two, we are the voter. President win the election, our vote. Why is special council making jeopardy? Thank you very much.
I don't know that I'm familiar with the case there. I'm not sure that I can only comment that I think every government tries to gain influence in every other government. And I think that that's typical of what the British have been doing down through the years. I mean, we're doing it too. So are the Russians. Everybody's doing it. So I think it's a matter of a lot of influence we buy with money. So,
British intelligence doing everything. British intelligence give us some kind of message, our president, and he bomb on Syria. You guys know everyone. So Syria, they don't have any chemical. This is just blow up. So why we have to involve British? Why we have to trust? We have to trust our intelligence.
Yep.
We have a best intelligence around the world. 18 department. What we are doing?
That's a question you need to ask there. And why aren't you trusting your people more so than anybody else? After all, they are the ones who have at least a vested interest in your country. Others are trying to influence it one way or the other to go to their side and do what they want you to do. That's typical of all intelligence. So that's what MI6 does. I think that's probably what you're talking about. MI6 and CIA, right?
They have a,
NSA less, but
Yeah.
we have our own too. So.
they have their another special agents. They are doing these things, and Congress and Senate.
Yeah.
How they playing with president?
I can't explain that. I really don't think we should be doing any of this.
They are Republican. They have to be work for the peoples of United States. They do not have any voice from the people. Your voice, my voice, their voice. They are going their old road. This is 21st century. They don't have to do these things.
No.
And
No.
how are you gonna stop these things?
Here what I try to do is just bitch, moan, gripe, groan, and sue them. That's the only way I can do that. Trying to get them into court out in the open.
Yeah.
Millions of dollars, you taxpayer, my taxpayer, money goes to their bullshitting what they are doing.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
actually suing?
Yes.
Which,
I'm supporting 4 lawsuits. Right. One in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, one in the Third, one in the 9th, and one in the 11th.
and you're an attorney?
For example, the former Anderson, the former mayor of Salt Lake City, is suing them in the 11th Circuit, and I'm supporting his lawsuit.
What are the grounds for the suit?
The spying on people of the United States in Salt Lake City during the Olympics.
Yeah.
Okay, so and I explained all the stuff to him so he understood it, could write up his complaint.
What is the statute of limitations? When I came back from North Korea, I went to Congresswoman Clark and I said, I want you to request on my behalf all of my files from the CIA, FBI, NSA, DIA, and IRS. And that was about 3 weeks ago. So I know I did get my files back. When I was in a car crash, nobody believed was natural, whatever. And Helen O. Holmes Norton did request. And 2 years later, I got a package, this thick, 400 pages. And of course, a lot of it was crossed out. But I have been in contact with, you may remember George Wall, the Nobel laureate. He was a professor of biology at Harvard. Who were the people I was in contact with? It was a Harvard professor. I mean, this is the way taxpayers' dollars are being wasted. I mean, there could be a class action suit on behalf of the American taxpayer that our dollars are being wasted.
Yeah, and the statute of limitations is basically doesn't apply because they're continuing to do it. So there's no statute of limitations on it.
So I could sue the government.
That's right.
Based upon, and I have documentation.
Yep.
Well, maybe I could just answer a couple of the questions.
Yeah.
I think what Mr. Binney has said in terms of the president having authority is again the point. He is the president,
Yep.
and there's the point is that he and the nation and the world are in jeopardy.
Yeah.
And so therefore, he has reason to take action. He has the authority to take action. He should move along the lines of exactly what the VIPs have proposed. But he also needs, and this addresses your question in terms of the economic situation in the United States. We have had a policy since Kennedy's assassination.
Yeah.
Let's not forget Kennedy and
Yeah.
Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther
Yeah.
King having been assassinated. This and what you had after that is a policy of increased, essentially a deindustrialization of the country through outsourcing, through the ideology of zero growth, limits to growth, industry's bad. There was a report that was actually put out by the Tavistock Institute in the 1960s, which complained about the fact that the space program was engendering technological optimism in the American population. So the space program was taken down, and that accelerated under Obama, who basically said, well, we've been to the moon, we've done that, so we don't have to do anything further. So what I'm saying is that you need to reverse that overall policy which set in after the assassination of Kennedy, and with some resistance at different points. But it essentially continued. So the point here, and then you had under Bill Clinton, you had the rescinding of Glass-Steagall, which was very important, going back to Roosevelt, in terms of preventing speculative investment and protecting it, as opposed to investment in real production. So it's those. So the president can announce. He promised it in October of 2016. I'm going to work with Democrats to pass Glass-Steagall. He should just do that. We've got an emergency in the country. We've got devastation from one hurricane and another about to hit. With already decrepit infrastructure in the country, he needs to say we are going to have an infrastructure fund, and we need basically trillions of dollars for this, and we need to actually have a credit policy to make sure that occurs. He needs to say, listen, the rest of the world is moving ahead with nuclear energy. We need to do that. We need to research fusion power. and we need to work with the Russians on the space program. We're dependent upon Russian rockets to go into space. So that's what we need to do. On the British question, the basic point here is that look at the last period of time. In 1999, Tony Blair gave a speech in Chicago in which he said that sovereignty is limited. And he put forward the proposal of the responsibility to protect, which became the justification for regime change policies under Bush with Iraq, and then under Obama with a succession of countries, starting with the whole Arab Spring perspective. So this is documented to have been a British-initiated policy. If you go back to H.G. Wells and his Open Conspiracy, that's the name of his book, Open Conspiracy. He said that sovereignty is provisional. We don't recognize sovereign nations. That's what he said, in his book, Open Conspiracy, and that is the policy which the British continue to pursue.
RTP was under Blair.
Excuse me?
Responsibility to protect.
Yeah, Blair is the one who pushed that. So what I'm saying is, what you need to do is get the president to take executive action at this point on economics and on the question of the regime change policy, which is aimed at him. It's not just aimed at Russia; it's aimed at him. It's like the Maidan in Ukraine. It's the same method that they're using against him domestically. And so that needs to be addressed by him. You can't depend upon the Congress. If he takes action, then see what happens.
Yeah.
I mean, if people object to him, then they'll be exposed. And it's just what Mr. Binney was saying. He should take this action. Anybody who opposes, fire them.
Yep.
Yeah,
I have another thing I wanted to add on your lawsuit.
What?
I have something very important to add on that lawsuit issue. You need to read Executive Order 13526. That's the executive order that governs classification of all material of the U.S. government. Every president signs it, and it covers every agency in the U.S. government. They're hiding behind national security using classification to hide their crimes. Section 1.7 of that order says you may not classify, maintain classified, or not declassify any information that's evidence of a crime or fraud, waste, abuse, corruption, or any form of criminality. So go to that section, and I kept arguing with the lawyers, saying, look, this is in violation of that law. He has to declassify this material. It's evidence of crimes.
13526, and what is
Section 1.7.
Section, and what's the name of the
executive order?
EO, if you just Google EO 13526, you'll get it.
Okay.
Two more questions here?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. First I put the question, okay. So more time I've heard from you, you mentioned Silk Road as a solution. My question would be, why would be a good answer to Silk Road, okay? And no, I had some short thing. As I know, it was a prehistoric thing. It went globally with the original name of Road of Light, okay? And we would like to develop a Silk Road, free zone system alongside it, okay? And you mentioned that it's not supported from here. Also, many lecturers mentioned background power. So, for example, the strongest, the head of the strongest background power, even here, also internationally, they supported this Silk Road. We just have to find the right channels. Okay, I can help if you want. The Chinese leadership here in the western side of the world. Okay, and they from Far East, they told us, come on, separate sources. For example, this president, separate sources for the Silk Road and also build it from here, because have to be balanced. And if you really see that it would be a solution, then we have to build it from here also. Chinese said, directly to me, to keep balance. Okay, just briefly add, I don't want to speak to the lady because I have to hear this. It's not so easy with North Korea. For example, I managed by the State Department, I invited the troops into Iraq. Do you know why? Because Saddam had an A-boat on the Skadra fields. They laid with the software. He had not only biological weapons, three factory created, and what do you think? I don't want to mention here because they.
Against Iran.
I put a question to you. Why do you think what country was there to build that A-bomb? So the U.S. troop, Saddam had A-bombs, just the software was not ready. Okay, what do you think? What experts were there in Iraq? Do you understand?
Say one thing.
So the U.S. troops sometimes not so bad. Just let me finish. If they do not go Iraq, a third world war developed there. I tell you, maybe 6 persons, including me, know this why they went into Iraq. Okay, I finished it. Just say it's not so easy with North Korea. And of course we know the background will, they want to unite South Korea and South Korea and North Korea. Okay, I don't want to talk because we are here.
Well, I mean, you say.
The Silk Road doesn't.
The point about the Silk Road, this is something that Lynn and Helga LaRouche, as I said earlier, have advocated for a number of decades. We put out a special report in 1997 called the Eurasian Land Bridge, the Silk Road. And Helga LaRouche spoke at a major conference now, I forget the exact year, but it could have been 20 years ago, in Beijing on the Silk Road. So, we were very much involved with this right from the beginning. And she recently attended the One Belt, One Road conference in Beijing. And the basic idea is, it's for instance, this is, the Pope Paul VI wrote an encyclical called Populorum Progressio, in which he put forward the idea that the new name of peace is economic development. That was never acted on. The Silk Road represents the first time that has actually begun to be acted on in the world. And it's being acted on a grand scale. No one is being excluded. It doesn't involve trade blocs. It doesn't involve military alliances. It involves a number of countries. I think there's like 69 countries that are involved in the Silk Road at this point. And the basic idea is transportation corridors, not just railroads for freight or passenger, but using the railroads, as was done with the Transcontinental Railroad in the United States, to become corridors of development where you can develop cities, you can develop industry along the transportation lines. Agriculture. You have many countries, particularly in Central Europe, which are absolutely poverty-stricken. They're landlocked, many of them. And there's all sorts of problems in terms of different conflicts among nations, among tribes, among religions, and so forth. So the basic idea is that you put, and LaRouche had advocated this, as I indicated, in the Middle East. How do you get the Israelis and the Palestinians to work together? It hasn't been done. But what LaRouche proposed was an oasis plan where you get them working together in their mutual economic interest, and through that process of working together, they begin to trust each other where the trust didn't exist previously, and that begins to overcome the hostility and based on historic injustices which everybody has grievances about. And the same is true with the Silk Road. You get nations working together on economic development. You're talking about, in terms of the United States, yes, the United States, for instance, the United States could be a great exporter of capital goods for the Silk Road.
But what is the problem? What do you think? Why don't they recognize this tool?
Well, because of geopolitics, because
between East and West.
the opposition comes from a geopolitical conception of after the Soviet Union fell, we're not only number one, but we're the only number one, and there won't be anybody else, and we're not going to let anybody else emerge in the world that threatens our dominance.
That's the problem, yeah.
So there.
But that's not necessarily something which has to succeed. That's the issue. With Trump, the only way you stop it is, for instance, well, look at the situation. Trump, when he campaigned, said, "I think it would be a good idea to work with Russia." This is primarily in terms of
Also
the terrorism
Korea.
issue. Yeah. But let me just finish in terms of this idea. The basic point he made is we are both thermonuclear nations with thermonuclear weapons. It's a good idea to work together. Otherwise, it's not good for humanity. So that's what he said. Now, that's not an unusual position among some of the presidents of the United States in history. John F. Kennedy, essentially had that perspective. Others have as well. Roosevelt definitely. Okay, China. Now, there were elements in his campaign who were anti-China on the trade issue, but what did he do? The first person he met with as a foreign leader was President Xi. And he also was invited to send a delegate, either come to or send a delegation to the One Belt, One Road conference in Beijing. He sent a delegation. That was important. So what I'm saying is, and what LaRouche, both Helga and Lynn LaRouche are saying is, we need to bring the United States into this geometry. China could also be investing in the United States, and we could be exporting capital goods. We could be producing trains. We could be producing steel for rail. We could be doing all of that. We could be producing energy plants, including nuclear energy plants. We could become a partner on a global scale, which would actually increase the standard of living of Americans in the United States and reverse the deindustrialization of our Rust Belt, which is where Trump won the Electoral College vote. We could do all of that. And so there is an actual interest, a national interest in joining the Silk Road, and that's what we're fighting for.
We have just another.
But that's reasonable.
Why don't they
Dealing
put
with
money
something
from
that's
here?
not
We have less than 10 minutes.
Yes, it
Really
can.
quick, just a quick comment is that, because it just seems that we have a history of just doing things for money and profit instead of actually doing what works and what's good.
Yeah.
And so, trying to get whoever, Trump, people in power, to switch gears. I mean, even if they have a gear to switch to, which they've been in the money-making gear for so long, like it might even, I don't know. I mean, I'm just sort of thinking out loud. I don't have this 100%, down, but I mean, that just seems like what is happening, and because money is debt-based. And they need to keep creating horror in order to keep the monetary system going. So it's just like this whole new way of living and thinking that the powers that be, or the deep state, or whoever, are just. They're not going to like the deep state, but who's ever going to challenge them just even has to develop another way of
They
thinking.
have the guns.
Okay, but then
Do you want to respond?
Yeah, let me just respond. The point, this is the key in terms of LaRouche's, what I refer to as his 4 laws, which is Glass-Steagall. That's the first point. Because Glass-Steagall is a counter to money as God. Because it basically says, listen, we're only going to protect banks which extend loans for real production and for necessary social services which contribute to the well-being of the population. We're not going to provide protection for casino banks. We're not going to spend trillions of dollars to bail out banks which committed crimes and continue to commit crimes. So that's the first step. And Trump has endorsed that.
Has Clinton revoked that?
Clinton revoked it under pressure when he was at the point of being threatened with impeachment, and he did sign the law.
At the
1999.
of the Monica?
Yeah, it was in that period. He had just called for a new financial architecture.
Yeah.
But for instance, there were elements of his administration like Rubin who were calling for rescinding of it, and the Republicans were very much for rescinding it. But the other side of this is credit policy, which Americans don't understand, which is that as a sovereign nation, you have the capacity to issue credit. That's what the First National Bank did under Alexander Hamilton.
Yep.
And that, you issue credit. And it's not a problem to issue credit if it's invested in real production, because real production or infrastructure will actually increase the productivity of the economy, and you will be repaid that credit which has been extended. This is a fundamental principle of the American system of economy, and that's what we need to actually do. So it's an educational effort, but there's no real alternative. And therefore, you have a certain necessity for action being taken. Will it happen? Is there a guarantee? No. But the point is, if we have this, we have a perspective at a point of national crisis, and that is when you have the greatest opportunity to bring about a change.
Get that?
Okay, we're going to have to implement it. We're going to have to, we have 4 minutes
Could I
before our
extend
guests
a
are going to be whisked away. Go ahead.
Let me sit here, I'll be in my camera.
Okay.
On September 11th, Monday, I will be on TV where I present an alternative. And the alternative involves putting in simple language an alternative. First, we have to recognize that our government is evil, that it is a criminal enterprise. And what is the alternative? There is an alternative to evil. The language I offer is we want individuality and human solidarity thriving. That's my effort to combine the left and the right. I talk about public corporations of, for, and by the people, serving the people and the planet. That's a new orientation. It's obviously a way of redistributing wealth from the 1% to the 99%, but instead of the usual Marxist rhetoric, I'm saying the public, the 99%. So that is an alternative. That does make sense. That would be better than what we got now. Or to put it stronger, I do have on peacefulrevolution.us simple language, but here's the kicker. The kicker is we should begin creating a government in waiting. Instead of milling around in their face, we can begin the alternative. And when it's worked out, we can peacefully vote the transition, withdraw our consent from the evil government, new people. By the way, I picked 9/11 that day to recite all this because
That's kind of like my suggestion on Article 5. It's very, very close to that. Yeah.
that the authority of the government is undermined when the public realizes that 9/11 was totally a false flag, cooked up by Cheney, Rumsfeld, Zelikow, the whole gang, that it was clearly controlled demolition, that when I have an engineering degree, I can make the argument, but I haven't heard you guys say it's controlled demolition, you in particular, Ray. Is it controlled demolition when a building...
It felt like that.
Or let me put it this way, there were millions and millions of nanospheres of pure iron in the dust. That is the chemical byproduct of the explosive.
Yeah.
So there's no other way that could appear. The buildings were exploded.
How are you going to get the public?
Can you, we're just going to have to wrap this up. Do you want to make any kind of, for instance, in the film on that Oliver Stone did, you started off by saying that 9/11 could have been prevented if your program hadn't been taken down.
Well, yeah, I think, see, the real nasty part of what's going on with our government is they're allowing this to continue. Because and that means more of us get killed and more of other people around the world get killed because we're not doing the right things. That's the real nasty part of it. I mean, it was done for money originally, but power and control were also behind it. And they're interested in preserving that money, power, and control, and not really doing it for the good of the country.
How do you get...
When you mentioned in the VIPS paper the question of Vault 7, that seemed to be you were introducing a whole different question, and you then related it to the Marble program in terms of showing how you could put in a false imprint. But
Yes.
what about the larger picture of Vault 7, which you sort of indicate?
Okay, the Vault 7 really is hundreds of millions of lines of source code, which boils down to thousands of different attacks. That means attacks on servers, switches, operating systems, firewalls, everything having to do with communications across the network, including the phone network, because switches, that's run by switches too. So and knowing about those weaknesses but not fixing them means they leave everybody vulnerable. Because not fixing those problems mean they're still there and anybody can find out or discover them, which means they can hack in too, or they can do things. They can start manipulating things. So that's why I said cybersecurity is really a swindle, because they're saying, we need money. Every time somebody gets attacked, like OPM, we need more money for cybersecurity.
Yeah, they said.
But if you don't fix the problems you know about,
yeah,
and those problems are, they're talking hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, at least attacks. You cannot, if you don't fix them, you can't say you need money for cybersecurity because you don't want it.
So when you say in the VIP's memo that it'd be possible to take a car and accelerate the speed to 100 miles an hour and from outside of the
remotely controlled.
Remote control.
See, that was the point about the iPhone. They didn't just want one iPhone; they wanted everyone in the world.
Yeah.
So that if I've got they've been collecting billions and billions of SIM cards. They mined some or broke in using these things. They broke into the manufacturers of the SIM cards that go into our computers and cell phones and stuff, and they collected all the equivalences of the ID with the access codes. That's what's in the SIM cards.
Mm.
So when they do that, that gives them the ability. If anybody comes on with an access code, you got that. Oh, there's the access code. Identifier. There's the access code for that phone. So if I have the ability to go into any iPhone, and I've got all these SIM cards for every phone in the world, that means anytime they come on the network, I can break into them, anywhere they are.
And so when the drones were targeting people through their phones?
Yes.
This is a
GPS off the phone.
related question.
Yeah.
And then, after they went after the Russians on the so-called hacking, for a little bit they tried different things. The New York Times had something yesterday about the Russians creating phony Facebook pages. But one of the things they said was that the Russians were going to, or had intervened in the electrical system and were going to shut down the electricity. This is the kind of stuff that is...
I wouldn't believe them until they produce the evidence.
Yeah.
It's very simple. Don't trust them. You can't. Look at what Comey's down there saying, Clapper's down there saying, how many, or Alexander, he was saying, how many U.S. citizens do you have in your databases? That was what Senator Wyden asked.
Oh, yeah.
That's the real relevant question.
Yeah.
So he said, I can't answer that, now I'll get back to you. So he got back to him in writing. This is on the web too, you can get it.
Okay.
He said, basically, we can't tell you that because that would be a violation of the privacy rights of U.S. citizens. Well, he's telling you I've got everybody there. That's what he's saying. And then I estimated it 280 million maybe of us.
Yeah.
He's doing exactly what he's saying he can't do.
Yeah.
Right.
And then you had said that it was for population control, so it's not just that they're tracking you, but they're also influencing.
Yeah, all this control in the mainstream media is the same thing, population control.
Mm-hmm.
How do the people get on the lawsuit? Can the people join the lawsuit?
You mean as additional advocates, or Well, I suppose you could. You could join them. Yeah.
Is it a class?
Can we put the
It's not a class yet, no.
word out and get the public to join the lawsuit?
Sure.
Let's do that.
Okay.
You
have to have the law. The lawyers would have to organize how we could represent ourselves in that, but I'm sure we could.
Mm-hmm.
One is run here in the Second Circuit by the ACLU. The one in the Ninth Circuit is run by EFF. The other two, one in the 11th, is run by the former mayor of Salt Lake City. And then the one in the Third Circuit is run by just by one lawyer he used to be in Pittsburgh, that's why it's in the Second Circuit, but he moved to Tennessee, so he's operating out of Tennessee, but still, arguing in the Third Circuit. So,
folks,
we have to.
time.
Yeah, we have to close. But thank you very much. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Nice to thank you. Thank you.
I just got a nice hat. Thank you.
Let's replace it.
Rainy now.
Is the sick bullet? Okay. All right. And what's this? Okay.
What time is it?
Let's work out a better way.
5:35.
Thank you.
5:35.
Pleasure.